Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining the call regarding the PacifiCorp Nodal Pricing Model Service Agreement that the ISO intends to file with FERC in the near future. My name is Christina Osborne. I work in Stakeholder Affairs. I'm going to be facilitating the web conference. Also from the ISO, I have Peter Ristanovic, I have Mark Rothletter, as well as John Anders, and Don Fuller will be joining us shortly. And on the phone we have, from PacifiCorp, we have Joe Horner, as well as Mike Wilding. They will also be presenting. So I did post the agenda this morning out on the miscellaneous stakeholder meetings webpage. That's where you'll find the market notice related to this topic. And so you see it here that we're displaying it in the web. There's really just the agenda that we're going to go over. It is an informational call. There will be an opportunity for stakeholders to ask questions after we go through the material. So Joe will be up first from PacifiCorp. He's going to provide background, and then Mark Rothletter will talk about the description of service that the ISO will be providing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning, everyone. Just want to give you a little bit of background on PacifiCorp for those that aren't familiar with that, and then talk a little bit about how we kind of got to this Nodal Pricing Model Services Agreement with California ISO. So just, high level, PacifiCorp operates in 6 states throughout the West. We operate 2 balancing authority areas, PacifiCorp West and PacifiCorp East. The states that we operate in are Washington, Oregon, California, Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah. A little bit of background on how we currently operate today to help kind of set the stage of where we're going in the future and how we serve a lot of our needs for our states and our customers going forward. So today we dispatch our generating resources on a least cost basis, meaning we dispatch our lowest cost resources first. These dispatch costs are allocated to each state under a methodology called the dynamic allocation of power cost. And Mike, who's with me, Mike, who's with me here today, is our Director of Net Power Cost and Regulatory Policy. So I'm going to let Mike explain a little bit about how that dynamic allocation works today, and which will kind of set the stage for where we're going in the future. So, Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So like Joe said, we have a dynamic allocation right now because PacifiCorp, we operate in the 6 states of Utah, Oregon, Idaho, Wyoming, California, and Washington. And historically, each of those states has participated in a proportionate share of our generation portfolio, and we've dispatched the system and operated the system as a single system to serve our retail load in all 6 of those states. And then to allocate those costs to those states for rate-making purposes, we've used the dynamic allocation factor that is based on loads and share of coincident peak. And that has worked really well for us in the past, as each state has, like we said, participated in PacifiCorp's generation portfolio equally. And what we've seen the last couple of years is with laws in Oregon and Washington as to specific resource types that they want to be served by, we're seeing this need to have unique portfolios for each state, which is really driving the solution. So I'll kick it back over to Joe to talk about that.
Yeah, so we're seeing, as Mike mentioned, we're seeing this shift where the states want to have more input into the resource choices that serve our customers in their state. What this does is it creates a paradigm now for us where we start to move away from this least cost system planning approach to a more customized approach for each individual state. That got us to the point where we needed a solution that prevented resource cost shifts between states due to one state's wanting a specific type of resource portfolio and another state maybe being fine with the status quo. So what we decided to do is draw upon the structure of the energy imbalance market and utilize locational marginal prices on a day-ahead basis to serve as a foundation for identifying resource costs associated with individual states. And really what we needed is we needed a day-ahead optimization run that created these LMPs that then we could then use to track the specific state costs and benefits. Now, a key point here is that this optimization run is only for PacifiCorp resources. It does not include any third-party resources. It's nothing outside of the PacifiCorp footprint. This is just PacifiCorp resources, and it's very similar to what we do today and how we manage the system and the optimization model that we use internally, but that optimization model does not give us the LMPs that we really needed, and that's why we reached out to the ISO about a year or so ago and started having discussions about being able to provide us with this solution, and that's how we came up with the nodal pricing agreement. In September of this year, what we called our multi-state process stakeholders, which included all the states and a handful of other stakeholders, signed a memorandum of understanding agreeing to this solution. So this is something that we will be using to determine PacifiCorp's net power costs going forward, starting in January of 2021. So that's kind of the background. I will turn it back over to Mark and Petter to discuss some more of the technical details.
Thank you, Joe. So to support the request for nodal prices, as Joe described, what the ISO did is looked at how we could do that. And what we determined was that the best way we could support that solution was basically to produce the separate day-ahead nodal prices and megawatt dispatch for the PacifiCorp resources out of our day-ahead market processes. And the way we got to that conclusion was that our day-ahead market model already models PacifiCorp and parts of the West, and what we determined is that we could provide that separate solution to PacifiCorp from that single optimization. Now, we do have to do some certain things to keep the results separate. One is we will be effectively enforcing a power balance constraint within the PacifiCorp East and West areas, and that will be separate from any other power balance constraint that we're enforcing in the ISO. Second, there will be no transfers, optimized transfers between PacifiCorp and the ISO. There will be optimized transfers between PacifiCorp East and PacifiCorp West when we do that optimization. Third, while we will be enforcing congestion constraints in the PacifiCorp area, we will keep congestion prices separated because we will enforce that there's no shift factor effects between the congestion in the PacifiCorp area and the ISO, and vice versa. And then lastly, similarly, loss factors will be kept separated. So we feel confident, but we know we have to demonstrate that we will be able to produce this separate result, and we intend to be prepared to test and demonstrate that. In terms of the results of the solution, we will be providing PacifiCorp the results in terms of the prices and the megawatts of dispatch on their resources, and that will be provided to PacifiCorp. And we will also be providing advisory but not settling financially any kind of settlements associated with those schedules. So there will be no financial settlement, but we will provide an advisory settlement file for PacifiCorp. Because this is not a settled market result, and this is information really for PacifiCorp to use in their net power costs and only used for that purpose, really this information will be provided to PacifiCorp, but we are not intending to publish those prices in the PacifiCorp area and the dispatches in the day ahead from the PacifiCorp area. And then, I guess lastly, the service is a service that we're providing, and we're intending to recover the cost of this service, and we've looked at the cost of providing the service, and it's about an $8.4 million cost of service for providing this service, and we intend to recover that, and that's really what we are filing is the details about that and how we intend to recover the cost of offering this service. I guess those are the main things in terms of how we intend to implement. Oh, last thing is that, so while we will have no transfers, optimized transfers between the PacifiCorp area and the ISO, PacifiCorp can continue to offer under normal intertie bidding at the ISO, and to the extent they are optimized through that normal means, those will be reflected back through some mirroring process so that the ultimate dispatch in the PacifiCorp area reflects not only meeting their load, but any obligations that come about from the normal import-export bids that cleared the ISO market. So I think with that kind of describes what we're doing. In terms of the bids that are being submitted, as Joe indicated, they will be providing bid information, effectively the cost of their resources. Anything that is not associated with their resources and there's third-party resources, we expect that PacifiCorp will be just self-scheduling those just for information, and then if there's any imports or exports to other areas, those will also be self-scheduled just to fill out the information of the model. So with that, I will open up to any questions or see if there's any internal comments, anything I missed. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, one other thing is that on the agreement, so the intent is to start this service January 1st, 2021. And in terms of the agreement, we intend to file it shortly. And I don't know, John, if you want to add anything in terms of the agreement.
Yeah, no, we'll be filing it, before the end of the year to commence the implementation activities associated with providing the service. The agreement just details the contractual terms and then the scope of work, and of course the purpose of the agreement is to establish the rate that the ISO would be charging PacifiCorp, and we'll go through all of that in detail in the transmittal letter. In particular, the rate itself. The rate itself will look familiar to stakeholders that keep track of our rates. We essentially used very much the same approach to determining this rate as we did with the RC services rate. We performed a forward-looking cost of service study specific to these services, estimated the direct and indirect costs associated with that, and aggregated all of that up, and we'll explain that in more detail in the filing, and that's how the rate that Mark mentioned of approximately $8.0 was.
One thing I'd also like to add, and probably a question that will come up in the Q&A, but this is not EDAM. This is not extended day-ahead market. In that, we are not optimizing transfers between the ISO or other areas. This is for information and advisory purposes only for PacifiCorp to use in their net power cost calculation. That said, I would say that by doing this, it may help provide a easier pathway if PacifiCorp were to ultimately move on and there was a EDAM service available and designed. again, in order to get to EDAM, we have to deal with some fairly significant issues in terms of how transmission is made available. That doesn't have a factor on this. How resource efficiency comes about, that's not a factor in this. So there's other things that we have to develop in terms of policy to really facilitate EDAM, and that's really why this is not EDAM. In fact, this was really kind of conversations about this started kind of pre-EDAM and really to facilitate, again, PacifiCorp's request for the prices and dispatch megawatt levels to support their net power costs. So I just want to clarify that this is not an EDAM and that it does not mind or have any expectations that PacifiCorp will ultimately participate in EDAM.
So, Joe and Mike, do you have any comments before we open it up for Q&A?
No, we don't, Christina.
Okay, great. So we'll go ahead and open up for questions. If you have a question, you can raise your hand by pressing #2, and please start by identifying yourself. Marco, please let me know if anybody interests you. We have 47 on the phone, Marco?
Currently have 51.
51, okay. So nobody in the queue?
We have no questions at this time.
So I recognize that there may not be questions at this time. I think as we file the agreement, we recognize that there may be additional questions that arise. I guess we would offer, if there are questions that arise after the agreement, we would encourage you to reach back out to us and we can try to address those directly with you directly. So I think that's it.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Just to let you know, we did record the call today. We're going to make that recording available out on the Miscellaneous Stakeholder Meetings webpage where the market notice related to this is. So look for that by the end of this week. But thank you, Joe and Mike. We appreciate it. And also thanks to all of you, and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes the conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.